Hi everybody, welcome back to Overtime. I'm Art Miles. Today we are going to be visiting with our very first news director at Fox 35 News back from 1998. His name is Bill Avery, and everybody who I've interviewed so far has worked with Bill, been interviewed by Bill, and hired by Bill. We'll talk a lot about what those first few years were like. If you have any interest in contacting me, go to overtimetv@yahoo.com if you have any questions or you want to send me some photos. I've been getting photos from a lot of people from back in this time period. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Next up is our interview with Bill Avery. At this time, I would like to say that if you were working at Fox 35 in the late 90s, you had to pass through this man's desk to get hired. And that's what I did. And so far, everyone I've interviewed has done. Please welcome Bill Avery to Overtime. Hello, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Art.
It's been a very long time. The 25th anniversary is right around the corner, and it just felt like a good time to reflect and look back. And you, of course, have the most unique perspective of that time because you were the one that hired everyone. I was saying with Steve Oldfield in an earlier interview that if they were giving out awards for casting director, you did the best job when it came to casting your crew for Fox 35 News.
Yes, and I think that was probably the capstone of my 36 years in television. Always before, whenever I got called about a job, it was to go in and fix something. Things were not going well. And so in this case, we had a chance to totally build it from the ground up and got to handpick the very best people who had the very best fit and could work together well and had that sense of camaraderie, teamwork, and a vision. And I just was thinking about this before we started talking, and part of that vision was nobody knew that it couldn't be done. And yet everybody was taking a kind of a flight of fancy by buying into this because you're starting from scratch. Nobody knows anything can happen or will. And they made it happen.
And for starting from scratch, you were there right at the front of it. They would come to you. Everybody would look to you when it came to starting from scratch. Tell us how you even heard about the job in the first place.
I was working at Meredith's affiliate in the Flint-Saginaw, Bay City, Michigan market, and had been there for 17 years. Was brought in as news director. Did that for 3 years, and then was made program director. Although I still would end up getting involved in things back in the news department, it seemed like on a pretty regular basis. And I got a phone call from broadcast headquarters in Des Moines in June of 1997, and Phil Jones said, how would you like to go down to Orlando and start a Fox News operation? Well, here I was sitting up in central Michigan and having gone through 17 winters up there.
Yeah.
And the thought process between where I was and where I was being offered took me all of 10 seconds. Like, how soon would you like me to be there? And
you didn't play it cool and say, let me think about it for a while. You just said right away.
Well, I did say,
Very good.
I need to talk to my wife about this, but I'm pretty certain I can assure you that that the answer will be yes. And actually, the fellow that actually triggered my hiring was Tom Collado, who was a GM at Fox 35. And Phil was the one who made the phone call to me because obviously they had to run in tandem. Tom had to run it by him. And I was intrigued because I had never really worked tightly with Tom before. We had bumped into each other at a couple of Meredith meetings, but really hadn't known each other. And so I was intrigued that he knew enough about me to make the request that I be the one to come down. And so that's how it got started.
It's a big ask of somebody to say, do you want to go down and do this? This isn't just you're going to run a news station, you'll do news for a half hour every day. This is, you're going to create this from the ground up. Where do you even begin at something like that?
In a large empty room. In fact, I have a couple of pictures of it that I can share with you.
Thank you. Yes.
Of the first day that I walked in, and all it was chairs piled up, some old fold-up desks sitting around, just an empty spot. And they let me use another office that had all the necessary equipment, like a telephone and a few necessities, until they could get back in and start the construction of building an office for me back there. And then we were working on fold-up tables with computers, kind of stacked wherever you could get them. And it was by the seat of your pants. It certainly was.
David Martin said he recalled that it was golf for women just before, and you had a lot of green carpet down on the ground before it was torn up for your offices.
Yep. Yeah, that's what you would see when you look at that first day picture, is just the remnants of all of the desks and shelves and everything that they had left behind. One thing that I think is important to understand too, and I know that you and David talked primarily in terms of Fox 35, but keep in mind that we weren't just launching the Fox 35 newscast. We were also launching a newscast on Fox 51, WOGX in Ocala, Gainesville.
Yes, and I believe Laura Stewart may fill us in a little bit more on that. We'll be interviewing her later in one of these episodes as well. She said she had some insight in Fox 51. You don't want to definitely forget about them for sure.
No, yeah, because we had, in addition to her, Ann Craig, Josh Fountain, Tram Mai, and Denise Honey.
Oh, you're very good. I'm picturing the plaque in my head of all the list of names, and you're doing a very good job of remembering those names.
Yeah, and they had their own news cars. They had their own live trucks. In fact, that's how they fed their video down. Came in via microwave. Their stories that they were doing, and we did the 6 o'clock newscast just for WOGX. It was done, obviously it was done off the news set here in Orlando, and then the 10 o'clock news was simulcast on both channels.
Laura was telling me she's got some photos also from that time. It was rare to see one of them at the station because they kind of just worked out of their cars, didn't they? I imagine, were they just editing at their cars whenever they weren't at the OGX location?
Yeah, they were really, on the fly up there. It was, but they did a great job. It was just that was really a case of where you're going up against a firmly entrenched, established newscast. Oh, yeah. Believe it was the ABC affiliate Gainesville, and they were just dominant, had been for such a long time, and we just had a very difficult time making any inroads in there. And so ultimately the decision was made that we closed that off, and we brought some of the team down from there to WOFL, because when you look at it and see the original team, it surprised me to go back and just look at how small that staff was to cover the Orlando metro area plus Ocala, Gainesville.
And not only just a small staff, they were very young, weren't they?
Everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. And Steve was mentioning that as well, and I think David at one point, the camaraderie between and the closeness between the group of people. We were all, nobody was over 30 years old in that group. It felt like it was a very young age to be working at a TV station for sure, but very exciting.
Especially in this size market.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the drawing card. Most of them came from small market TV stations. The good news was that, unlike their larger market brethren, who were used to having at least a photographer out with them and sometimes other personnel, they were in markets where they were often doing one-man band reporting. And coincidentally, that's how I started in television back in 1965 at the NBC affiliate in Springfield, Missouri. We were shooting 16 millimeter film.
Oh.
It was a small staff. Nobody figured out how much money a news department could really make at that point. They started figuring it out pretty quickly as we progressed. But yeah, so everybody, including myself, carried a camera. I remember driving a news car home at night, and if something broke, and I was a news director, but I rolled out at dark 30 in case something blew up, and that's just what we did, and we really scrambled, but everybody got used to it. Nobody thought anything about it.
So I guess you were kind of the right man for the job when it came to starting up a news station and teaching new employees about being a one-man band, because that was certainly the case for many of the reporters during those first few months and years at Fox 35.
Absolutely. And we had a tremendous break on a number of cases. Just the number of coincidences are unbelievable when you look at Panasonic had just come out with those lightweight digital cameras that
DVC.
I think they cost $3,000 or something like that. We'd been buying cameras that were $35,000, at stations I was working at. And so to be able to do that and have a lightweight portable unit that really anyone could carry around with them made all the difference. And the fact that they were digital, the video quality was phenomenal.
They were so compact, those machines, the DVC Pro edit machines. We'd have one or two in each edit bay, but they all had handles on them. You could pick up and go with them, but those probably were a little expensive as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah. But overall, when you balanced out what our costs were, and we really did have a shoestring budget.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question next. Not specifically the actual numbers, but what kind of situation were you in when it came to budgetary concerns, when it came to getting equipment, cameras, laptops for editing, employees, trucks, things like that? What kind of concerns did you have budgetary wise?
Tight. It was tight. Plus, you got to remember that we designed and had a news set built, and that whole thing was there were several big markers as to where you spent a considerable amount of money. And needless to say, we did come in on time and actually a little under budget.
Oh.
But at the same time, we got this phenomenal group of people who worked well together and were very creative. The things that they would do and people would come up with, it was just like, well, let's try that.
And the reason why they were able to try that, and this is my first and greatest memory of Bill Avery, one of my first few 2 p.m. meetings that we would all go to. We'd all gather around, usually around Joanne's or Lance's desk, to do our 2 p.m. meetings. Lance was the producer and Joanne the anchor. And one of the first memories that I have is we're all gathered around and you sat down in one of these chairs that kind of rocks back a little bit. You put your hands back behind your head and you lean back and you said, "What do you guys want to do today?" And I will never forget that, because I don't know if before or even after in a newsroom, if you hear a news director lean back and say, "What do you guys want to do today?" It was
Right.
The field was wide open.
Yeah. And to your point, Art, about the age of the staff, uh, one of the first things that I told everybody when we had our first staff meetings before we even started doing run-throughs was we are aiming at the 18 to 49-year-old demo. And I was able to point at myself and say, "You look at me, I am not your audience. You look at each other and you're our audience. You're the people that we want to talk to." And so who better to reach that group than their peers? And that's what they were. And which is why it was so simple to say, "Well, guys, what do you think we should be doing?"
Mm-hmm.
Because their tune might have been considerably different than what I would have come up with on my own. Plus the fact I really wanted to engender a entrepreneurial spirit among everyone on that team, to all let them have buy-in and input and suggestions. And so it really got to the point, which is what I was after, where when we would start those 2 p.m. meetings and we'd start going around the desk, people had actually been formulating in their minds ideas for stories. Well, I think we ought to look into this. And so one luxury we did have was we had only 1 half-hour 10 o'clock newscast initially. And so we had a lot of latitude to produce the stories during the day and really develop them for just that one telecast.
And it was very challenging because the time difference between a 2 p.m. meeting and going on the air at 10 p.m. means a story could change a lot. That's a long time, and you only have that half hour to do what you want to do. So between 2 p.m. and on the air at 10, a lot can happen in that amount of time when it comes to the story that you hope to put on the air. It can change.
Oh yeah, and did. There were times where we would have basically pretty much had the show put together and something out of the blue would happen, and it's like, okay,
We're blowing out the
this
rundown.
idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember I can hear Lance's voice in my head still. We're blowing out the rundown. Pages 7, 8, 9, 10, and 15 are all dead, and we're going live to so-and-so. And it's like, and as somebody who, we worked all day on this show, and now it's all gone because this wildfire is happening, or this major accident just happened, and we're able to go live there. That's part of the business. But when I was in college, I felt like I was still in high school. And when I came to Fox, I felt like that was my college. I learned so much during that time. And I think myself and many people got a chance to just thrive while they were there because they learned so much in a short period of time. And I think specifically of David Martin, when you say to him, as you said to all of them, "I'm not your demo. You guys are the demo." What do you think the story should be? I think that's when somebody like David Martin really got to thrive there.
Yes. Yeah. I think everybody did, and they understood that opportunity and that real just miracle of being able to be hands-on part of something from starting from the get-go. And as a result, their creativity brought together elements of a show that were distinctly different than the traditional newscasts in the market. And I remember Hal Bodeker at the Sentinel, who was a dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist, didn't like us at all.
TV critic, yes.
And didn't mince any words when he wrote his column about what we were doing. And I said, hey, guess what, guys? We're doing it right. Because if he doesn't like this, he's not our demo either. And I distinctly remember we did a focus group 6 months after we launched. And it had a group of different age group people, and they were showing clips from the newscast, and then the facilitator was going around the room asking people what they thought and did they watch Fox 35 News 10. And I'll never forget, this one woman stood up and she said, yes, I watch it. Now, she was older. She was probably my age or better. And she said, I do watch it. But she said, I have to wait for half an hour before I go to bed because it takes me that long to wind down from the pace of the program. And
that's probably the best compliment you could have received.
I nailed it. Bingo, because that was it. It moved fast. We had the flashy graphics going. We had those transitions, between stories and stuff like this that nobody else in the market was using. And some of the old school just laughed at that. And yet
I found one of our one of our old news opens from that first year.
Good evening, I'm Donald Jones.
And it's just the music is energetic and it's quick cuts. And as I was playing it back, I found it online somewhere. My stomach tightened up a little bit because it reminded me of that time, like as an editor, it's like, okay, here we go. Whether we're ready or not, this show is starting. And we'd be on headsets and Lance would be in our ear and play this video. And it's like, it all came back to me. It was very tense. And just like that woman, we all had to wind down afterwards.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it was really a whole new experience. And the funny and somewhat gratifying part was to see that after a couple of years, number one, we became number one in our time period in 1 year after launch. In the February 1999 Nielsen and Arbitron book, we beat out Channel 18's long established 10 o'clock newscast.
The original 10 o'clock news, as their promos went, right. They had to call it that because you guys came along and started to get some attention. So they called themselves Bud Henninger. I remember his voice coming on saying the original 10 o'clock news.
Right. but no longer the winning 10 o'clock news.
Right.
Yeah. So that was really something. I personally never envisioned the fact that we would be able to make things move that quickly. That it's awful hard to move the needle among entrenched viewers. They get locked into habits, and so it's hard to get them off that base. And one of the things that we were able to do was we totally owned 18 to 49 men. And that was a coveted demographic because no one else in, all the other stations, their whole audience was 50 plus, basically. Yeah. And here we came on and we owned 18 to 49 men, which no one could reach. And so immediately we had an extremely sellable program on our hands.
And that demographic at the time, and I remember this on Sundays, even before I started working there, Sundays were all day Fox events with football, The Simpsons. But then once the X-Files came around and grew in popularity, it became your most popular night of the week. And I imagine that Joanne will probably tell me she didn't get to work on Monday through Friday job. She worked on Sunday nights because that was the biggest night of the week on Fox television.
And that is the night that we launched, was Sunday night.
Unless it's already begun. You're feeling it too, aren't you? That's why you were chosen.
The X-Files, an all-new episode, Sunday at 9, 8 Central on Fox.
We had the best lead-in possible going for us, and that certainly did help. And so, yeah, we did. We put our emphasis. We front-loaded our emphasis on having the main anchor team on Sunday night through Thursday night, and then Friday and Saturday night when a lot of our demo was out partying.
Right.
That was our weekend.
So you said that, one of your things that you did well on was on time and on budget. So the launch date was supposed to be March 1st, 1998. Those first few months leading up to that date, what were some of the bigger obstacles that you had to deal with? I mean, of course, you had to find a staff and equipment or all that, but what were some of the big obstacles that really stand out in your mind in those months leading up to your first broadcast?
There were quite a few, actually. One that was really looming on me was a communication system. And another one of these unbelievably fortuitous events occurred. Louis Olivero comes into my office one day, I don't know, October, November, and he said, "I want you to meet somebody." And this guy walks in, and he's from, believe I've got this right, from Nextel.
Oh, yeah. I already have the picture in my head. The little beeping, chirping sound.
Handheld, click to talk, two-way, walkie-talkie cell phones.
Replaced.
How'd you do that?
Coast to coast walkie-talkies get it done. Nextel.
That was the future. That was unbelievable when that came out.
And our only alternative, which I had been sweating, was building a traditional Motorola two-way radio system with transmitter here. We'd have to have one in Ocala on the tower there. It would, and all at once, this guy walks in, and it's just like, we're done. And you can talk anywhere. I remember I was going down to Key West a few months after we got rolling on a little weekend vacation type thing. And I had mine with me, and as I was pulling into the Key West city limits, I just keyed Lewis on the assignment desk, and I said, "Hey, Lewis," and he said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm just pulling into Key West." He says, "It sounds like you're sitting out in the parking lot."
Amazing. Yeah. Boy, that really solved some problems then, didn't it?
Yeah. And I think the other was what you and David discussed, and that was the lack of any historical footage. We had to really kind of build our own library of, things that the other stations would take for granted because they've been in business for so long that they had, libraries full of file video that they could pull anytime. And so we did spend, 2 or 3 months there collecting things that we knew we were going to need. Certain canned shots that you always knew you were going to want. I think you got up in a plane and did some aerial video of certain places, and just kind of that type of thing. And then just before we launched, we had a storm system come through because we had just done a run through for the newscasts. So we were in that last 2 to 3 week countdown to air. And we had just wrapped up the 10 o'clock run through, and all hell broke loose outside. I was driving home, and things were flying across the street. It was like, my gosh, what's going on, Well, of course, what we had was, I don't know, 3 or 4 tornadoes or something that spun through. And so by that time, we were already treating the news coverage as if we were live, hot on the air every night at 10. So we jumped on the coverage of that and went out, got all the video. I remember Lewis tracked down video from I believe it was a Walmart store in Oviedo, maybe. And they had an in-store camera that captured the storm hitting their place, blowing the windows out, and you could see people just running down the aisles, things flying everywhere around the store. And we had that video.
That's a good get from Lewis, by the way, because I'm sure nobody called Fox 35 and said, hello, I've got some great footage for you, because you guys weren't exactly taking phone calls yet, were you?
No, we weren't on the air. We did an awful lot of calls and visits with sheriffs, fire chiefs, police chiefs, letting everybody know what we were doing, how to reach us, because they all had their own public information officers, and we definitely wanted to be on their call list. And so we did a lot of that groundwork like that too. And Joanne and several of the others were getting out in the community and had getting some visibility. And then, Lewis, to your point, was really a spectacular find. And I am trying to remember exactly how we got connected, but he was working at Channel 6.
Oh, okay.
And he was not the assignment editor, but he was in that area.
I guess my visual memory of him would be up at that desk with a phone cricked on one side and usually a cigarette on the side of his mouth, unlit, because he hasn't had that 1 minute to go outside and light that cigarette, because he's been down on the phone like this, for the past few minutes. That's how I remember him. Sometimes
two phones. Yep. or the two-way radio in one hand and the phone in the other.
Yep.
He was a real juggler.
So he had to, at some point, go through your office to apply for the job as well?
Yeah, and I'd already heard about him. And then I, just started checking around, and 2 or 3 different people said, you really got to get this guy. He knows everybody. I mean, I think he used to do ride-alongs with the cops, just to get to know them while he was still at Channel 6. So he knew a lot of these people on a first name basis. And so he really was able to get us plugged in on a lot of levels. Plus he had just an amazing creativity when it came to wonder where we could find video from that location at that time. And we did use some stringers
Sure.
that were available. That's all they did was run, chase things overnight, and then call up and ask if we wanted the video the next day. And, we picked and chose between it.
Sure. You probably had no choice at that point for them to contact you to say, do you want this or that? You kind of had to say yes, because you didn't have enough crews to go out there to shoot some of those items.
That's right. Yeah, that was a real saving grace from our standpoint, and all the stations used that. It wasn't just us. It was just a way that things happened in a market that is so wide, spread out and everything else, that you just can't have everybody everywhere all the time. And we certainly didn't have the kind of resources that they had at the established news jobs.
I'm trying to remember which came first. Did we add another show, or did we just increase the size of the 10 o'clock show? Were you still there when the show went from a half hour to an hour show at 10 p.m.?
Right. Yeah,
That's a huge jump because okay, you could just say math wise, you could say, okay, you've doubled the size of your show. That means you're going to double your staff and you're going to, no, you're not doing any of those things. You're just going to have the staff that you have and you're just going to do an hour show now.
right.
Is that something that comes from the head office saying, okay, you're going to do an hour now? Or is this something that you had involvement with?
I think, no, I had some input on that. And honestly, because like we were discussing earlier, the half-hour show, by the time you cut that down, put in weather, sports, and commercial breaks, you had a really very, very short time span to cover things. And so when we started contemplating going to the hour, it wasn't a really huge stretch for us. And we were able to add, I think, 3 or 4 more people just specifically for that expansion, because it was more than, and at that, around that same time was when I think we folded the WOGX operation. So we inherited the people that were brought down from there too. So that gave us a lot more feet on the street, which we desperately needed. It was,
which would have been, I believe, Laura Stewart, and was Beth Sherman as well.
Beth was already here from the beginning. She covered Volusia County.
Volusia, that's what it was. Okay.
Laura came down from Ocala, and then she held down Brevard County for us. And they had their own live truck over at Rockledge so that they could feed their stuff back in or do live shots.
Right. Laura was one of those that we very rarely saw at the station,
right,
because she was always out in the field. If she was in at the station, it was unique because we didn't see her that often.
Right.
And then, but Beth, I remember seeing Beth at the station quite a bit and always live at 10 p.m.
Yeah. No, she was, I mean, she physically lived, almost everybody lived very close to where the station was, because Kate Hansen did such a great job of going around visiting some of these different apartment complexes that were very close to the station and meeting with the managers and going, we're bringing on a crew of people, and do you have the opportunity of picking up 20, 25 new renters? What kind of deal can you give us for that? And so, obviously we got some breaks on that was very helpful, because we were passing along to these folks that were coming in that weren't making a whole lot of money. I mean, they were doing all right for the way Orlando was back at that time. Today, given the way the cost of living in Orlando, you could never pulled it off. It would have, the cost would have been astronomically higher.
How hands-on did you have to be in the beginning, those first few weeks and months, when it came to the technical side of things? I mean, as a news director, you think of a news director as somebody who's they're gonna help with the news together. They're gonna suggest which stories we should do. But for you also had to deal with, we need these live trucks. We need, towers. You need to deal. How much of that were you having to deal with at the same time as hiring employees to do news?
All of it. Yeah, it was 24/7, 365 from way before the launch date. And it was coming up with, what cutting edge things can we do, which is somewhere along the line where the Mustangs came up as an idea.
Yeah. I remember there was a photo in the Orlando Sentinel with that, showing off the Mustangs when they were talking about this new news station. And that was one of the things that stood out, and they had a photo of, was the Mustangs. Nobody else in town had those, that's for sure.
Yep. And Electronic Media, the national media magazine at the time, had that same picture on the front page of their magazine, with the Mustangs with the racing stripes. And I mean, that was a really tremendous branding concept for us.
I always
But
remember or imagine picturing a pen holderness trying to climb into one of those cars and then just wondering how low those seats had to go so he could see out the front window.
I imagine he had it pushed all the way back and was probably almost sitting in the back seat to be able to do it. But then there were so many other technical aspects to it. I mean, we were working on the design for the studio, and we were working with a company here locally that did that type of work, fortunately. And we had to explain to them that we were looking at something totally unlike what they were doing for anybody else. Their original presentation was just like a cookie cutter. Mm-hmm. And I remember Tom Collado and I talking at that point with them and saying, it's just not cutting edge enough. And so back to the drawing board, and then all at once, here were these steel girders and all these other kind of, I don't know, cutting edge type looks to the set that weren't at all normal for what you see on the old standard.
Very, very metallic. No more wooden desks like you'd see at the old stations.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it was a real adventure. And here again, everybody who came on board, you know, Tara, Lance, as people were brought on, everybody got a piece of that action, you know, to input as to what their thought would be, you know, what do you think? And so that was an exciting part too. And Joanne Bauer was extremely helpful, very talented, very engaged and creative. Just like I really everybody in that group. If there's one thing that I'd say was a shared characteristic was, man, they were just the most creative group of people. I mean, they just came up with things that were, you know, terrific.
And you kind of, I guess, must have seen that in each and every one of them that you had hired, and you'd put this group together who had a lot in common when it came to creativity. And but I imagine at one point you must have had I mean, this was before the internet for sure, a box of tapes that you had to go through when it came for searching for your anchor. What was that process like for you to find the new anchor at Fox 35 News at 10?
Oh man, you talk about tape. Thank goodness for Kate Hansen, because she would get those and catalog them as they came in, so we wouldn't lose track. And we had stacks of them just outside my office. I think a couple of hundred, probably.
Oh, jeez.
And you know, the funny part was that knowing what we were looking for, especially when it came to the anchor people, but also the reporting staff as well, was, I remember I got to the point where I could slide something into the tape machine and it would roll, and in the first 2 or 3 minutes, it was like either sit back and keep watching or eject.
You knew, yeah.
It just wasn't there. And then all at once, I came across Joanne's tape, and I had it running, and I called Kate and I said, take a look at this and let me know what you think. And she said, oh yeah. And Joe was doing the noon news over in Sarasota at the time, so she was close by. And Tom Collado saw her audition tape, and we all agreed she was really worth taking a hard look at. And so she came over, and we got a deal cut with her. And and here again, all the time that you're doing this, you're building up the staff, and you're not creating any revenue yet.
That's a little scary at the corporate office. I bet it's a little scary for them. How's it going down there in Orlando? I don't know. We haven't had a launch day yet. It's getting a little scary.
Your expense column was going like this, and your revenue column was just going flat line.
And speaking of the corporate office, were you getting any notes from them at all when it came to the type of anchor that they were looking for? Were they interested in a male anchor or a female anchor? Did they totally leave that up to you? Were there ever any thoughts about it should be a male or it should be a female? What were their thoughts, or did they give you any?
We had free reign. Phil Jones was the president of the broadcasting group. Great guy. And to his credit, it was pretty much, it's all your baby, go for it. And I did do a lot of calls and meetings with the Fox News channel people in New York. And they came down 2 or 3 times and would, we'd walk through what we were doing, and they would have some hints, because the thing you have to realize is in 1997, there weren't a whole lot of Fox News operations going. We were really one of the earliest ones.
I'm trying to picture in the state of Florida. I grew up down in South Florida, and I don't recall at the time, having them doing news at those Fox stations.
I don't think so. I think maybe Tampa might have been up already, but they were very few and far between. And of course, that was the thing that Fox News was looking at, was they were trying to get this network of affiliates, that would feed, their product in New York. And so we were the Central Florida Bureau for Fox News nationally as well. And a lot of our stuff showed up on there.
Very good. That's right. So as you were going through that box of tapes, was there a set that came together of 2 tapes that had the Jones family on there, Donald and Janice, or were those in separate boxes and they all just happened to come together because you hired a new weather and weekend anchor, I believe, and they were Donald and Janice Jones?
Yes, and it was not designed as a package deal, but we actually had 2. Eric Clinkscales
and Jennifer, that's right.
And Jennifer, we hired together. She is a reporter, Eric as sports, and Scott Burridge was our sports director. And Donald and Janice just, first of all, you were hiring in 2 different directions. You were hiring, it was kind of, in Donald's case, it was a anchor reporter slot. Janice's case, it was meteorologist. So it was, it was just one of those strange coincidences
before working there. I don't recall growing up watching news or even in college realizing like, oh, that's a husband and wife sitting at the anchor desk together. I don't recall that happening before. Did you ever have that situation come up before?
Yeah, actually I did. I was working in Sioux Falls, South Dakota as news director up there. And we had a husband and wife team, and they did the noon news together, and they were older. They'd been married a long time, and they would snip at each other.
That's good television.
And so after I watched this for a little while, I called Gina aside and I said, what's going on? So, you guys, nitpick each other during the show. And she said, it's the only time we see each other. I thought, oh, okay. I think I've got an explanation here. We got a bigger problem.
At least in your situation in Central Florida, Janice was at the weather area and Donald would be at the anchor desk, and they would only usually get together to say goodbye at the end. So you were safe there.
Right. Yeah. Well, and fortunately, an entirely different group dynamic than we had at the old station I was talking about.
It was great. I worked a lot of weekends with Donald and Janice because when I first came in, I worked weekends for a couple of years. And it was just a great atmosphere to be there. I mean, if you thought it was pretty laid back Monday through Friday, working the weekends there, it was really something. But it gave you an opportunity to get to know people, because I bet in the newsrooms today, it's get your assignments and you're out. You don't even know some of your coworkers. I bet there's people who haven't even met other people, but you got to know people in that situation back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and working weekends with them was always fun.
Yes, it was. And we had, I don't want to let an opportunity to go by without recognizing what a role Tom Collado played as general manager. Again, all the free reign that I needed, all the support that I needed, all the cheerleading that he could bring, which was considerable to the staff. And at the same time, when I was hired as director of news and programming.
I did see that on the plaque, and I was trying to reflect back on that, and I'm thinking to myself, well, when did you have time to deal with programming?
And to that point, a lot of credit goes to an unsung hero who was not actually part of the news team, but Kim Strickland, who was my assistant in the programming department. In all honesty, ran programming.
She reached out to me on Facebook just the other day after watching the first interview and said that she's got some photos for me as well. It was great to hear from her.
Oh, yeah. And Kim just did a fabulous job. She kept that operation running smooth as silk, allowing me to devote all the time, which really absorbed almost all my time. I did still meet with syndicators when they would come in.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because when we were if a program was being shopped, in the market, they would be coming by the different stations. I always took out time to meet with them, and so that we had a good shot at whatever programs we were looking for, and then I dived right back into the news operation after that.
It was probably it was definitely not an 8-hour day job for you for quite some time in those first few weeks and months and possibly years.
No, it was, and I was used to that from having done it early on back in the 60s, 70s, early 80s. You just knew that you were going 24/7, 365 before that terminology ever came up, in which was associated with the internet world. Well, trust me, in our world, it happened a long time before that.
Yeah, you didn't have, when you look back in those early years of 98 and 99, the internet did not play a big part in any of that, really, did it?
Not really.
Not yet.
No. Very
as a resource, as a way to find out many different things. And I imagine as I've interviewed some people, or even when David, how did you even find out about this job? Because he said WOFL or Fox 35 didn't even have a web page up and running at the time that I think he was looking into the job.
Nope. We had advertising in broadcasting, magazine, I think in electronic media, the main media magazines that were out there to get the word out. And of course we had people that we contacted through all the years that I'd been in the industry, and just saying, hey, listen, we're firing the shop up. And so if you've got any ideas, people that you've run across, seen in certain markets, want to get rid of in your market, that was always a game to play. And some were under contract, and I wasn't able to get a hold of them. But most of them were pretty, flexible at that time. I do remember I was surprised at the number of the candidates that we had who were in these extremely small markets, but already had agents. And so I would
You
have
have
a
to
meeting.
deal with that.
Yeah, I would have a meeting with whatever reporter it was, and then immediately after, I get this call from their agent, and they're going, okay, I'd like to talk to you about the deal. And I said, well, let's save us both a lot of time. This is the deal. This is the amount. This is the position. And this is an opportunity for your client to jump from whatever number market, 100 and whatever market that they had been in, to a top 20 market in the country without any intermediate steps, which would traditionally have taken at least 2 hops.
Which means none of them really needed to have an agent for getting this job, because it was kind of the job of a lifetime. I mean, and if there was no wiggle room, unfortunately, they may have spent a lot of money on an agent that they didn't need to.
Yeah, if you wanted to throw your money away at something like that, then that wasn't my decision. But certainly when it came to negotiation, there was none. It was,
Did you have a certain number of, okay, we can only hire this many reporters, this many anchors, this many photographers? Was there any wiggle room at all for you, or you had to stick to those numbers?
We had a pretty good idea of what we needed when we started out. It became, it was always fluid. And one of the things that we did realize that we needed more of and didn't have were editors. And that was one of what I guess you would call almost the 11th hour aha moment and so we had to go in back and say, hey, look, I know we only listed this many people, but we're going to need,
right,
I think it was 3 more positions.
I think you had Bridget and Mike Velocity, and I didn't come around until almost a full year after your launch, or it was like right at the anniversary, I believe, is when I started. And then your photographers as well would edit. Daryl, I know sometimes as the chief photographer would stay in house and he would do some editing, but it's something to think about, because some of these editors, okay, they got to have a day off here or there, so you're going to need a couple of editors.
Yep, we had Mark Williams. He was one of the...
Mark Williams, thank you. That was the other one. I saw his name on the plaque.
He and Mike were, they were, I think, our first 2 that were hired. And boy, I'm telling you, it was a godsend. We definitely needed that backroom support. It made all the difference in the world.
I was very lucky. My story is that at the time I was a wedding video editor and also shoot wedding videos as well. So being a wedding photographer makes you a good editor. Being a wedding editor makes you a better photographer. So that was, for you, unfortunately, what was on my demo reel was weddings that I had edited, as well as music videos I had made with my friends. I don't know what your thought process was hiring me, but thank you. But I just remember that I had heard from my wife, my girlfriend at the time. Her brother worked with a girl, and this girl was dating Goose, and then Goose handed my tape to Daryl, and eventually it got to your desk. And I just remember going in at that point. You guys were almost at a year on the air, and it was so exciting to walk through the doors of a TV station. It's something I always wanted to do, but I don't think I had the resume to get in at the other stations. So I crossed my fingers and turned in whatever the heck was on that tape. And I was able to sit in front of your desk and just to have you ask me questions rather than me asking a lot of questions. You were asking about me or what I was interested in. And I was like, God, I really want to work at this place. It just seems wonderful. And then so I had a trial basis for a little while and was trained by Mike. And then I eventually, off and on, stayed for 18 years. It's been a wonderful place to be there for sure. But to be there, I wasn't there at the very beginning, but to be there when the newsroom was what it was back then before it changed into the other building was just, I don't know if I knew it at the time, but I certainly know it now. It was such a unique and wonderful place to be in the late 1990s.
It sure was. And we were fortunate to have you and the rest of the crew. And
we made friends for life, I think, as well. Like I said earlier, when we started there, we were none of us were in our 30s. Some of them, just barely mid-20s. Nobody was married. And then as it started to happen, I got engaged. And that was the one thing I think I said to you in my meeting, is it's the only thing that I need is I'm getting married in November. Other than that, I can be here anytime you need me. But that I was engaged, and then David and Darren and Casey, and it's like we all seemed to get married around the same time, and we all had kids around the same time, and now our kids are in high school and getting close to college. Some of them, mine is, and we all kind of grew up together though at your station. We loved it there. Yeah,
and it's really been a blessing to me to be able to watch, via Facebook, Instagram, the posts that everybody puts up of their families and how they've grown up over the years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's a really,
and now the kids are growing up, and I'm just going to put this out there for anybody at Fox who sees this. My daughter is in her second year at college at Valencia, hoping to transfer to UCF. But she has to take one class that is an internship. And I'm thinking to myself, why not? Why not try out an internship at Fox 35? You'll learn a lot there. That's for sure.
I'm sure. Yeah. It's a whole new world.
Oh boy, definitely
rarely wandered back into a TV station, but I have a couple of times in the last few years, and it is just an entirely different vibe. It's a whole different atmosphere. Right. It's there's a tactical feel to it that is so much different than when we were doing this wild scramble to get everything on the air, get everything running correctly, cobble together a broken down satellite truck that we got from WSMV up in Nashville, our sister station. They're using it as a boat anchor. They were using it as a spare dish to receive syndicated programming parked in the parking lot. And I said, hey, wait a minute. We don't have a satellite truck, and so corporate made that happen.
I'd love to see the repair bills from 99 to 2000 on those trucks.
Boy, and we had a guy that refurbished that thing when it got, I think it actually had to be trucked or towed down here. And he went through that and rebuilt it and just did a phenomenal job of putting that thing back together again. And, it was one of those big dishes. It was like a 3 meter, the old fashioned. It wasn't the little portable discs or anything like that. The sucker was huge, and it had the support legs that went out, when we came to hurricane coverage time, man, that sucker, you could park it and it wasn't going anyplace.
It was fine, yeah. And he was probably the only one authorized to drive it too. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah, for at least for a while.
So you had to train somebody, yeah.
Yeah, it was a real piece of work, but magnificent job. Again, one of those things that was just like, you know, good fortune and great creativity among the whole group of people, and just the dedication by each and every person in that news operation to a commitment of absolute excellence and cutting edge and, you know, breaking the mold and doing stuff that nobody else had ever thought about trying, and it just clicked. It was just, Tom Collado described it very accurately. He said, "You guys created lightning in a bottle."
Well, at the very least, I would like to try and gather up a lightning on a WebEx and gather up and do a group meeting close to the anniversary date. And we put you right in the center square of that little Brady Bunch box of 9 or so employees. So I think in the future, we're going to try and gather up as many as we can to do a group chat so we can swap stories and tell things about those early first few weeks and months and year at Fox 35 News at 10 from 1998 to 99. So if you would be available for that, we would probably love to have you, because every one of them will have a story to tell about you, I'm sure, and sitting in your office that first time applying for the job.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they would, and I, you know, I think, you know, certainly Lewis and Kate Hansen, and Tara, Lance. I mean,
Lance,
really
great.
one of those,
Yeah.
that first real core group that was in there, pretty much from the get-go.
They've got stories to tell, I'm sure, from their
yes.
point of view. I bet, yes.
And some that they probably wish I didn't know about. But,
but it's been 25 years. Maybe we can discuss those things now. That'll be fun. I think yes, we'd like to have a producer WebEx meeting where all of our producers get together, and then we have an on-air one. And I would definitely like to have you on both of those calls if you're available, because I'm sure that would be a great
that would
reunion.
be a riot.
Yeah, we haven't had a reunion in a while. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time, Bill. Thank you so much for letting me interview you today. Thank you for hiring me back when you did in 1999 and let me go off on my honeymoon for 2 weeks. And for getting together these group of people that I believe in Central Florida made history.
They absolutely. Yep, they did.
So look for another episode with Bill Avery coming up soon, close to the anniversary date on March 1st, and we will gather together as many people as we can. Thank you, Bill, so much for your time today.
Thank you, Art. It was a joy.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode. Tune in next week on Friday at noon, and we will be visiting with Beth Sherman, one of the very first news reporters to be hired at the station. That's all for now. Thanks for the drone footage, Walter.